Welcome, John Pavlovitz.
Thank you so much. It is such a joy to be with your community. And Kathy, thank you for the gift of that music. And I know as a songwriter, I know what it's like to play a song that's so new that you just don't feel like it's just not in your hands. You don't know what's going to happen with it. And so I'm grateful for that fearlessness. It was wonderful and exactly what we needed today. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
So I am... it's a joy to be with you today. I am, the way we'll work this today is I will, as I'm talking, if you'd like to ask some questions, put them in the chat box. And what we'll do is, if we can, at the end of my message, I will answer some by reading through the chat box. And I'm going to try to have you just raise your hand and I'll try to find you and click on you. We'll see if that works. But it's just an honor to be with you today. I want to begin. I received a text message from a relative that I hadn't spoken to in a while. And the message simply said, you're coming across as really angry lately. And I just replied, good. I thought I was afraid I wasn't communicating appropriately. I wanted to make sure that I was clear. And he didn't really appreciate the sarcasm with which I delivered that message. And he replied again, and he said, I feel really sorry for you, the anger that I see in you. And I said, I don't want you to feel sorry for me. I know why I'm angry. And I think what I'm angry about is worth my anger. And you are probably much nicer people than I am. And so this message may not even be something that you wrestle with, but for me, there's been a tension in me because I think that anger tends to get a bad rap, historically speaking. As a person who was raised Christian, it is not among Paul's fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Anger does not make an appearance. And if you were asked to list some of the characteristics of Jesus, that would probably not be high on people's lists. But one of the things I want us to think about today is to remember that anger and love are not mutually exclusive. That in fact, sometimes what appears to be the former, what appears to be anger, is actually a profound prompt by the latter. Many times our anger is actually a holy discontent that internally disrupts us to the point of action. Sometimes anger is actually what begins the process of us becoming aware of the pain of the world and then responding to it. Now, the spiritual traditions and the great thinkers before us, they all rightly warn against the potential toxicity of unhealthy, cultivated anger. So Buddha says holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else, but you're the one who gets burned. And Albert Einstein says that anger dwells only in the bosom of fools. Plato says there are two things a person should never be angry at: what they can help and what they cannot. And in my faith tradition, Jesus says that I tell you, anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. And a wise person said, anger tears me up inside, my own or someone else's. That, of course, is Betty White. Now, I can maybe argue with Gandhi or Buddha or Einstein or even Jesus at sometimes, but I'm not going to mess with Betty White. So I'm running into a roadblock here as a fairly fiery spirit, as a passionate person who responds passionately to the world. This kind of wise consensus against anger was really ticking me off. And I read something by Aristotle that offers us a different way of thinking about the redemptive possibilities of anger. Aristotle says, anyone can become angry, that is easy. But to be angry with the right person and to the right degree and at the right time and for the right purpose and in the right way, that is not within everybody's power, and that is not easy. I'll read that to you again. Anybody can become angry, that is easy, but to be angry with the right person and to the right degree and at the right time and for the right purpose and in the right way, that is not easy and is not within everyone's power. So I love those filters, the right person and the right degree and the right time and the right purpose and the right way. So the object of my anger, the level of my anger, the timing of my anger, the purpose of my anger, and the manner of my anger are really matter. And these who and how much and now and how questions can give us a healthy way of assessing the appropriate nature of our outrage and a productive expression of it. Because I believe that appropriate outrage and a productive expression of it is inherently spiritual. And so it's really important that we do care so deeply about the world that we are moved to change that world when injustice is part of that world. But it can be difficult to know in the middle of life what is an appropriate expression of my outrage. Emotion often clouds when we most need clarity. Pastor at the church where I'm a part of here in Raleigh, he talks about the thing under the thing, right? You've heard that before probably. The idea that when some afflictive emotions surface, that it's usually not about the present moment or the seemingly obvious source. It's not necessarily about that at all. So your spouse or a family member or a partner or a friend you're living with puts a dirty dish on the counter instead of in the dishwasher and you blow a gasket. It's probably not about the dish, right? It's about your feeling of being disrespected and not listened to. It's about feeling frustrated with the ability to keep the house clean, or it can even be about deeper things like feeling financially insecure or emotionally disconnected, or you're grieving someone's loss, or something that you've been carrying around for decades. It's not usually about the dish. But there are times when the present moment and the obvious source are in fact the right person or the right thing at the right time to be angry with. And I imagine as I talk about anger right now, you have already begun a list of the things that burden you in this way. You can already name the places and the things and the realities and the people that cause that internal disturbance in you, that cause that alarm in you. And as spiritual people, this means that we invite God into that initial anger, and we let our response to that anger be a prayer that we can't even find words for. Because I think there are beautiful prayers that can be answered when we bring the things that disturb us to the love that holds us all. Not long ago, you've probably been watching the news as I have, and you might have seen something that was really startling to me in a beautiful way. It was a group of moms in Portland, and they were responding to the protests, to the Black Lives Matter protests. They were responding to heavily armed officers coming in and trying to create violence in the middle of a group of people who were protesting violence. And I saw these moms, and they were mostly white women, but they were locking arms to defend protesters. And these mothers were inarguably angry, but their anger, it was fueled by something beautiful. It was fueled by a love for humanity. It was fueled by an imminent threat to that humanity. The anger propelled them out of their homes and out of comfort and out of safety and into the more treacherous streets. There was nothing hateful or destructive in their actions, even if they were being received by people who disagreed with them as violent, as angry. In fact, their defiance felt like, to me, a profoundly sacred act. It was holy ground there on the pavement in Portland that resembled Jesus as much as any carefully crafted sermon. It turns out that hatred is really in the eyes of the beholder, that anger, it really depends on your perspective and where you're comfortable. So for you and for me as people of faith and morality and conscience, as we try to figure out a way to cultivate a healthy outrage, we have to be careful, right? Because religious people throughout history have used the phrase righteous anger. I've used that phrase. Well, I have righteous anger. And I was at a gathering in Texas before the lockdown, and we were having a Q&A after a message, and a woman grabbed the microphone and she said, "John, I just think it's time that we just say right is right and wrong is wrong, and those people are wrong, and we have right on our side, and we have history on our side, and we have to make sure that we call it out." And everyone applauded, and I agreed with her. But I said, right now across town, there's a people gathering who are opposite of us. There are people who believe the exact opposite politically and theologically, and there's a pastor or a speaker who is very different from me, and they're saying the same exact words, and they're using the very same tone and the very same war rhetoric for us. They're sure that we've got it wrong, and they have it right. So righteous anger, we have to be careful. We should probably jettison the idea of righteous anger, because everyone believes their anger is righteous. Everyone believes their cause is just and their motives are pure, right? I know you do. I know I do. But if there's any kind of anger that people of faith and morality and conscience should aspire to, I think it should be redemptive anger. That we can focus on the results of our efforts and our activism. In other words, does our anger yield something that brings justice and equity and wholeness? With the results of our anger, do they make more people feel seen and heard and respected? As a result of our anger, is diversity nurtured or is it assailed? So come to think of it, maybe anger is the wrong word. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe anger has such bad PR that we should just get rid of the idea anyway. And so I'm going to suggest to you, good people, that we replace the word anger with ferocity. I remember seeing a video of a child playing in the driveway, and a coyote actually ran up and was about to attack this young child, and the family dog came and attacked the coyote and scared it away. There was a ferocity there that protected something that animal loved. Or you know how a parent fiercely defends their spouse if there's a disaster. The way we see someone in danger, we will fiercely defend their lives from threat. The way my wife fiercely defends me when there's a spider in the bathtub, things like that. See, we know that when humanity is in danger, that we will move to protect it with passion, and we should. Ferocity for humanity, it's what birthed the civil rights movement. It's what has birthed the women's movement and the fights for LGBTQ equality, and all the work that someone like Ruth Bader Ginsburg spent their lives doing. It was through judicial channels, it was through legislation, but it was born out of a ferocity for humanity. And that's what has sustained us for years and years and years, the anger of good people. And I think for me, as someone growing up Christian, I saw that in Jesus. I saw that ferocity for humanity is what made Jesus turn over the temple tables, and it's what made him call out the religious leaders, and it's what made him declare solidarity with the poor and hurting, and it's what caused him to be executed. Jesus, I think what we miss about Jesus often is, if you'll forgive me, his righteous pissed offness. The fact that he had this courage when other people were being damaged. And right now, I don't think you can have a passionate response to the world without anger as some sort of initial propellant. And the important thing that we should think about is that this passion, this ferocity for humanity, it's always going to be interpreted negatively by people who seek to do damage to humanity. It's always going to be labeled angry and hateful to people who benefit from inequity or injustice. So religious people or passionate people on the opposite side of our convictions, they're going to always attempt to shame us into silence in the name of a Jesus they probably would have been really uncomfortable with. And so the beautiful collective anger of good people is actually the antidote to all that afflicts us right now. The feeling of not rightness that you have when you look at the world, that is what is going to propel you out of your life alone and into the lives of other people, where you can live an interdependent relationship and where you can give your gifts, where you can give compassion, where you can restore and heal. That only happens when you decide that something is not right and I need to be part of making it right. You know, in my travels, I do a lot of speaking, but I do a lot of listening too. And in fact, these days, when I'm able to travel and even online, I don't consider myself a pastor or an author primarily. I consider myself a collector of stories. I consider myself a war correspondent. I arrive in a new town usually, and I say to people, tell me what's happening here on the ground so that I can tell the folks back home. I get into the trenches of people's lives, and they give me proximity to their pain, and they tell me their stories. They share with me their grief, and I try to imagine what they're trying to say to the world, and I try to say that to the world. That's how I do what I do. And sometimes the words that I write that they tell me, sometimes those words are full of grief, and sometimes they're frustrated, and sometimes they're confrontational, and sometimes those words bring turbulence, because the people who I'm spending time with need someone to create turbulence on their behalf. And I think that's the most beautiful thing when we think about some sort of redemptive anger, some ferocity for humanity, is to realize on the other side of that work are other people who are valuable and beautiful. And as I travel or when I talk to people online, and I try to look for patterns in what people share with me. And one of the patterns I wanted to share with you today was that I realized, whether it's a transgender teenager and her mother, or whether it's a group of Muslim activists, or it's a Black Lives Matter organization, or it's a man who's been living in a church for 2 years because he is undocumented, or whether it's a person who's had a personal tragedy, over and over again, what people say to me is not, John, could you be less bold? Could you be less confrontational? Could you be less loud? What people who are vulnerable and hurting and invisible often say is, why are so many people of privilege so quiet? Why is there so much silence from the people who I need to be an advocate for me? And so that's important for us. That's why holding on to that sacred alarm is so critical, because these are tiring days, right? And we can't afford to grow so tired or so complacent or so apathetic that we lose our ability to be outraged. I think we have to hold on to our intolerance to injustice. It comes from a source that tethers us to other people. That anger comes from a place that makes our shared humanity the most important thing. You know, if you've taken a medication for a long time, and eventually your body can build up a tolerance to it and it no longer works and you need a different medication. And right now we can't afford to build up an intolerance to humanity. It's incredibly easy right now to give up. But I want you to focus on people who have less than you, of privilege, of a voice, of comfort, of rest, of peace. I want you to have a profound discomfort. And I want you to develop that passionate response that fiercely defends lives that are in danger. What's going to happen when you live into that, when you begin to try to find a healthy way to cultivate your outrage and to express it into something else that is redemptive, You're going to make people uncomfortable. You're going to rattle places of privilege. You're going to make enemies where you may have had friends before. People are going to misunderstand your motives and they're going to mischaracterize you. But the important thing is to focus on the why of your passion and the why of your anger. So I'm okay being labeled angry. I just want to make sure I'm angry at the right person, at the right thing, in the right degree, and at the right time, and in the right purpose, and in the right way. So my prayer for you, for all of us, that we will hold on to our ferocity for humanity, because I think that's what's going to save us. I'd like to ask if you have some questions, thoughts, responses, observations, anything that you'd like to share. I will look in the chat box. You can put it there, or you can put up your hand and just wave, and I will try to click on you. I'd love to hear what your responses are to anything that I've said, anything that you've been feeling lately. All right, I see Ray, right? Ray, are you waving? All right, I'm gonna unmute you, Ray, I think. I hope Ray wants to talk. Ray, if you can unmute yourself, if I'm right, great. I'm going to look in the chat box now. How to respond to confrontation with love and kind words. Francesca says that. How to respond to confrontation with love and kind words. Well, the challenge is when we are in a conflict, even if our words.
I did, but I didn't put anything, so I don't know.
Okay. I'm sorry. Ray, did you have a question? Whoever unmuted themselves. Okay, I'm going to answer Francesca's question. So the challenge is when we're in a confrontation, even our kindest words, even our most loving words are probably going to feel unsettling. So you can do all you can to carefully choose your words, and you should. And what I like to tell people is, remember, on the other side of you is a story. That I was at a demonstration for, it was a conference for LGBTQ Christians. And I was talking to a lesbian teenager in the coffee shop where the hotel was, and we're talking about equality and differing opinions. And she looked outside the window of the coffee shop and she said, "John, tell me how I love and lovingly engage him." And I look out the window and there is what I would call Southern Baptist sign guy. He's got a sign and a bullhorn, and the sign says that she's going to go to hell for who she is and who she loves. And I said, after I wanted to phone a friend, after I wanted to run, I said, we have to remember that sign guy didn't show up as sign guy, that he's not a stereotype, that he has a story and a path, and he had a family in which he was raised, and a sense of who God is, and a voice in his head that condemns him. And so we need to respect his story. So I think that's the most important thing, is to realize that we are going to make people uncomfortable, but we can respect their humanity and the journey that they've been on, because they are a product of that journey as much as we are a part of ours. So Sylvia says, you have focused on anger, but how do we soothe the terror? That doesn't easily turn into fierceness. You're absolutely right, Sylvia. I think one of the things that is medicinal is community. So it's much easier to feel terror when we are separated from other people, or when we imagine that we're experiencing a conflict alone. And it happens to me doing the work that I do. I'm online, I'm seeing the news that's trending, and I believe all of a sudden my story is everyone believes that but me. And that's when I can carry too much on my shoulders, and that's when I become a victim of my fear. But when I'm talking with other people, or I'm engaging other people, or I remember that there are hundreds of millions of people who are on the same journey and have the same unrest and the same questions, then I figure out, what can I do in that community to push back against the darkness that I see? So look for the people that you can do the work with, and realize that you never are in those places alone. Thank you for that. Glenn says he has a question. I'm going to try to unmute you, Glenn. We'll see if this works. We're kind of flying here. I've requested an unmute. Glenn, unmute yourself and ask your question.
Ooh, it worked. Hi, thank you so much for your talk, and thanks, Kathy, for our church and everything. All right, so my question, you talked about our beliefs and how strongly we believe them, and how strongly other people believe their beliefs.
Mhm.
And it reminded me, like when I was a kid, I asked my dad once about war, and we were playing like army, you know, and we were the good guys, so we had the green uniforms, and I asked him, like, well, why do you go to war? Like, you could die. And he's like, well, people believe in something strong enough, they're willing to die for it. And I go, well, what about the other guy? Like, he believes it that strongly too? And he was like, yeah. So it reminds me, like, that's how strongly other people believe what they believe. So how do we work on getting along or moving forward?
Well, thank you, Glenn. And I think one of the things that happens is right now in our culture, there is that battle posture always. There's that war rhetoric. And I think part of that is fueled by our politicians, part of it's fueled by religious leaders. And because there's a huge movement in our country, I think that has been, I always tell people the divide in America is not Democrat, Republican, and it's really not, it's not conservative Christian, progressive Christian. It's not Christian and atheist. It's a vision divide in how we see the world and we see other people. So some people are moving from a place of compassion and some from a place of contempt. That there are some people whose faith is really built on the idea of love, and some people's faith is built on fear. And there is a group of people who believe that there's abundance, that if we're creative enough, that there is enough for everyone. And then there are some people who are taught to live in lack, that they don't have enough and that anyone else getting more. So the problem is that I think there's a large number of people who are in that battle posture always, that someone is to be conquered or feared. And that's what we have to change. We have to believe what we believe passionately, but let people know we are actually for humanity, as expansive a definition as we can have. And so, yeah, we want to live for the things we believe, not necessarily die for them. It's a different mindset. We want people to have peace and abundance and joy. And that's what we're trying to do. I'm going to ask a question from the chat, then we'll do another one. And Kathy, you just break in here when you need us to wrap up. Okay. Francesca says, I also cannot comprehend the huge chasm that exists between the left and the right and how to bridge that other than ignoring major human political issues. Well, that's the good thing. I've preached and taught and spoken on something I've called the humane middle. And the idea for me is that when I would travel the country, I would ask people, hey, what kind of person does the world need right now? And they would say person of honesty or compassion or kindness or generosity or courage. Regardless of their political or theological background, right? Regardless of their affiliations, they want the same type of person. So it's not necessarily that we have to ignore the important things. It's that we have to make sure we're all defining things in a similar way. What does compassion look like? What does love look like? What is generosity? What does that even mean to us? Because I think most of us could agree on the elemental things. It's just in the packaging of them. It's in the distribution of them. It's in the details that we start to have the problem. So that chasm, I think there are a lot more people in the center, politically, theologically, and just in regards to shared humanity than we think, because the other voices are so loud, which is why you're so important. Your voices on social media, your voices in your social circles, they matter because they're not getting heard a lot. Anyone want to ask a question verbally? If not, we will have Kathy and we will move on. But thank you for your engagement and your time. I appreciate it.
I think Shyla, did you want to ask something?
I just a quick one, John. What about? I really this really makes me feel good because I'm part bear, and so I kind of run around growling anyway. But there's no particular target to the anger. It's just the times that we're living in. And you know, the ignorance and the aggression and the greed and
Yeah.
all those things that we're working so hard to transmute. Uh, what do you do when you don't have a target?
Well, when I don't, yeah, when I don't have a target, I still have to create an expression.
Yeah.
So I have to make sure that my anger or my frustration is not where I stop, because there's really nothing productive there. So I have to transform it into something else. So even when I don't really have a person to be angry with, I have organizations that in my community that I jump into, or I have people who I can interact with online. I have stuff that I can create. I can have all these beautiful acts that I can do in response to the anger. And I really tell people to look for their burden, whatever it is that really hurts them, whatever really, which they call compassion, is actually related to the word bowels, because it's an internal disturbance. But I have people lean into that, because that's going to usually guide you to whatever I'm feeling burden for. I can express that in some way that's going to make, if I think the world is cruel, then I can live with kindness. If I think the world is selfish, I can live with generosity. So it's trying to find that feeling and then live oppositely that.
Thank you. Yeah, finding the fierceness in love.
Yeah, that's the thing. You can be loud and loving, and we have to remember that. You can. We know what that looks like when we've experienced it. My mom's Italian, and she's always at the top of her voice, you know. And then growing up, I used to, like, I said, why are you? She would yell, and she said, I yell because I love. And I said, well, you could love me a little less. But the idea was that was just her way of expressing that, but it was a passionate love, and that's a beautiful thing.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, John. That was just really, really enlightening, really powerful, really good, and certainly not a talk that I've given. So thank you so much. Really excellent.